dictatorship Stalin gave his troops the right to rape, to steal, to kill, to do whatever they want to do.
There were millions of casualties during World War II. But many others, especially women and children, were victims of abuse and rape. Join us as we look at what they did to women during World War II. Marocchinate. The name Marocchinate refers to the mass rapes and massacres committed in Italy following World War II's Battle of Monte Cassino. These were primarily committed by Moroccan Goumiers, colonial troops of the French Expeditionary Corps led by General Alphonse Juin, and principally targeted civilian women and girls, as well as a few men and boys, in the rural villages of Southern Lazio, between Naples and Rome. Mass rapes continued throughout the campaign, particularly in some northern Italian cities. The Allies took Rome on June 4, 1944. The following night, tens of thousands of Goumiers and other colonial forces swept into the villages of southern and central Italy. Italian victims' associations, such as the Associazione Nazionale Vittime della Marocchinate, claimed that 3 million women aged 3 to 40 were subjected to brutality as the Goumiers took control of the towns. The Italian Ministry of Defense estimated in 1997 that there were between 200,000 and 300,000 female victims. The death toll among men is believed to exceed 80,000. It is difficult to estimate how many children were born because of the Marocchinate. The mayor of Esperia, a commune in the province of Frosinone, said that 700 women out of 2,500 residents were raped in his town, resulting in numerous deaths. According to Italian victims' unions, Goumier raped about 7,000 civilians, including children. Barras believes the figure of 12,000 women raped offered by the communist women's organization Unione Donne Italiane is credible, in contrast to the 2,000 women reported by the Italian Senate. Alphonse Juin. Alphonse Pierre Juin, a senior French army commander, rose to become Marshal of France. He graduated from the military special school class of 1912 and served in Morocco in 1914 as commander of native troops. When World War I broke out, he was transported to France's Western Front, where he was severely wounded in 1915. He could no longer use his right arm because of the wound. After the war, he went to the Superior School of War. He decided to serve again in North Africa. After the commencement of World War II in September 1939, he took command of the 15th Motorized Infantry Division. During the Battle of France, Juin was captured after his division was encircled in the Lille pocket. He was a prisoner of war until 1941, when he was liberated by the Vichy government and appointed to head French forces in North Africa. Following Operation Torch, the British and American invasion of Algeria and Morocco in November 1942, Juin directed French forces in Tunisia to combat the Germans and Italians. His exceptional abilities were demonstrated during the Italian campaign as commander of the French Expeditionary Corps. His experience in mountain warfare was critical in overcoming the Gustave Line, which had stalled the Allied assault for 6 months. Following this service, he became chief of staff for the French forces and represented France in the San Francisco Conference. In 1947, he returned to Africa as France's resident general in Morocco, where he fought Moroccan efforts to attain independence. He then advanced to a prominent NATO position, commanding CENTG until 1956. During his NATO leadership, he was elevated to Marshal of France in 1952. He was strongly opposed to Charles de Gaulle's decision to grant Algeria independence and was retired in 1962 as a result. He was the French Army's last living Marshal of France until his death in Paris in 1967, at which point he was buried at the Les Invalides cemetery. German women were raped by the Soviet Red Army soldiers. As Allied troops entered and occupied German territory in the latter stages of World War II, mass rapes of women occurred both during combat operations and during the subsequent occupation of Germany by soldiers from all advancing Allied armies, though most scholars agree that Soviet occupation troops committed most of the rapes. The wartime rapes were followed by decades of quiet. According to historian Antony Beevor, whose works were banned in several Russian schools and universities in 2015, Soviet secret police archives proved that the leadership was aware of the situation, but did little to intervene. Rapes were frequently committed by rear echelon forces. According to one Russian academic, Red Army officers and numerous privates were prosecuted for atrocities. The actual number of German women and children raped by Soviet troops during the war and occupation is unknown, although historians believe it was in the hundreds of thousands, and potentially as many as 2 million. Algerian War. The Algerian War was a major armed battle that lasted from 1954 to 1962 and resulted in Algeria's independence from France. It was a crucial decolonization war, with guerrilla fighting and war crimes. The struggle escalated into a civil war both between and inside the communities. The conflict was fought mostly in Algeria, with ramifications in metropolitan France. The battle, which began on November 1, 1954, during the Toussaint Rouge, resulted in significant political issues in France, leading to the fall of the Fourth Republic and the establishment of the Fifth Republic with a strengthened presidency. The severity of the French forces' tactics failed to win hearts and minds in Algeria, alienated support in metropolitan France, and tarnished French prestige overseas. As the conflict progressed, the French population gradually turned against it, and many of France's main allies, notably the United States, shifted from supporting France to abstaining from the UN debate on Algeria. Following huge pro-independence rallies in Algiers and other towns, as well as a United Nations decision recognizing the right to independence, Charles de Gaulle, the first president of the Fifth Republic, decided to begin discussions with the FLN. The Avian Accords, signed in March 1962, marked the end of these negotiations. On April 8, 1962, the French people voted in a referendum to accept the Avian Accords. The ultimate result was 91% in favor of ratifying the accord. And on July 1st, Algeria had a second referendum on the accords, with 99.72% voting for independence and only 0.28% voting against. The projected French pullout triggered a state crisis. This included several attempts to assassinate de Gaulle, as well as military coups. Most of the former were carried out by the OAS, an underground organization composed primarily of French military men who supported a French Algeria. The OAS conducted several bombings and killings, both in Algeria and in the homeland, to prevent Algeria's intended independence. The war claimed the lives of between 400,000 and 1,500,000 Algerians, 25,600 French soldiers, and 538 and 6,000 Europeans. During the war, citizens were massacred, raped, and tortured. The French razed over 8,000 towns and sent over 2 million Algerians to detention camps. Following independence in 1962, 900,000 European Algerians fled to France within a few months, fearing the FLN's retaliation. The French administration was unprepared to accept so many refugees, causing chaos throughout France. Most Algerian Muslims who had worked for the French were disarmed and left behind, as an agreement between French and Algerian officials stated that no action could be taken against them. However, the Harkis, who served as auxiliaries in the French army, were seen as traitors, and many were killed by the FLN or lynch mobs, frequently after being kidnapped and tortured. Approximately 20,000 Harki families were able to flee to France, some with the assistance of French officers acting against orders, and they and their descendants now account for a sizable proportion of the Algerian population in France. Allied invasion of Sicily. The Allied invasion of Sicily, also known as the Battle of Sicily and Operation Husky, was a major World War II campaign in which Allied forces invaded and captured Sicily from the Axis powers in July 1943. It began with a huge amphibious and airborne operation, then a 6-week land campaign that launched the Italian campaign. To divert part of the Axis forces to other locations, the Allies conducted many deception operations, the most well-known and successful of which being Operation Mincemeat. Husky began on July 10, 1943, and concluded on August 17th. Strategically, Husky met the goals established by Allied planners. The Allies drove Axis air, land, and naval forces off the island, and the Mediterranean sea lanes were opened to Allied trade ships for the first time since 1941. These events culminated in the overthrow of Italian dictator Benito Mussolini on July 25th and the Allied invasion of Italy on September 3rd. Adolf Hitler, the German leader, canceled a major offensive at Kursk after only a week, in part to divert forces to Italy, resulting in a decrease in German power on the Eastern Front. The collapse of Italy forced German forces to replace Italians in Italy, and, to a lesser extent, the Balkans, resulting in 1/5 of the German army being diverted from the east to southern Europe, a proportion that would remain until the end of the war. Battle of Monte Cassino. During World War II's Italian campaign, the Allies launched 4 military assaults against German forces in Italy, known as the Battle of Monte Cassino, or the Battle for Rome. The goal was to break through the winter line and allow a push towards Rome. In early 1944, German soldiers held the western side of the winter line, which included the Rapido Gari, Liri, and Garigliano valleys, as well as other adjacent peaks and slopes. Together, these elements formed the Gustav Line. Monte Cassino, a historic hilltop abbey built in 529 by Benedict of Nursia, controlled the surrounding Cassino town and the Liri and Rapido Valley gates. The Germans had left it empty because it was in a protected historic zone, although they did man certain positions set into the hills below the abbey's walls. Repeated artillery strikes on British forces led their officers to believe wrongly that the monastery was being utilized by the Germans as an observation post. Fears grew, as did casualties, and despite evidence, it was destined for destruction. On February 15, 1944, Allied bombers dropped 1,400 tons of high explosives, causing extensive damage. German soldiers occupied the region and set up defensive positions among the ruins. Between January 17th and May 18th, Allied troops attacked Monte Cassino and the Gustav Line defenders 4 times. On May 16th, soldiers from the Polish II Corps launched one of the final attacks on the German defensive position as part of a 20-division assault across a 32-kilometer front. On May 18th, the Polish and British flags were hoisted over the remains. Following the Allied triumph, the German Senger Line disintegrated on May 25th, driving the German soldiers from their positions. The capture of Monte Cassino claimed 55,000 Allied casualties, with German losses estimated at 20,000 killed and wounded. They were commanded by French officers and even served with the Free French forces. Moroccan Goumiers. The Moroccan Goumiers were indigenous Moroccan troops who served in auxiliary units of the French Army of Africa from 1908 to 1956. While technically serving the Sultan of Morocco, they were commanded by French officers and even served with the Free French forces. The Goumiers' military victories in Italy were accompanied by extensive claims of war crimes, in which an unprecedented number of Moroccans were executed, many without trial, for reportedly murdering, raping, and pillaging their way across the Italian countryside. The French authorities attempted to alleviate the situation by bringing many Berber women to work as camp followers in back areas solely for the Goumiers. According to Italian sources, Goumier raped almost 7,000 people. These rapes, subsequently known in Italy as Marocchinate, were committed against women, children, and men, including some priests. The mayor of Esperia, a commune in the province of Frosinone, said that 700 women out of 2,500 residents had been raped, with some dying as a result. Following the Germans' retreat, it is said that the Goumiers raped and occasionally killed women and young men in northern Latium and southern Tuscany, including members of partisan units. 2. Charles de Gaulle. Charles de Gaulle, a French army officer and statesman, led the Free French forces against Nazi Germany during World War II. From 1944 until 1946, he commanded the Provisional Government of the French Republic, which aimed to re-establish democracy in France. During the Algerian War in 1958, President René Coty appointed him prime minister, prompting his retirement. He amended the French Constitution and established the Fifth Republic following a vote. He was elected president of France later that year, and he served until his resignation in 1969. Born in Lille, he was a decorated lieutenant in World War I who was wounded multiple times and imprisoned by the Germans. During the interwar period, he promoted mobile armored divisions. During the German invasion in May 1940, he led an armored division that counterattacked them. He was later named Under-Secretary of War. Refusing to accept his government's armistice with Germany, de Gaulle fled to England and pushed the French to continue fighting in his appeal of June 18th. He led the Free French forces and then the French National Liberation Committee, becoming the unquestioned commander of Free France. In June 1944, he was appointed head of the Provisional Government of the French Republic, France's provisional government after its liberation. De Gaulle implemented a dirigiste economic program in 1944, which featured significant governmental control over a capitalist economy, followed by 30 years of unparalleled growth termed as the Trente Glorieuses. He resigned in 1946, but remained politically active, founding the Rally of the French People. He retired in the early 1950s and authored war memoirs, which swiftly became a classic of modern French literature. When the Algerian War threatened to topple the shaky Fourth Republic, the National Assembly restored him to power during the May 1958 crisis. He established the Fifth Republic with a strong presidency and was elected with 78% of the vote to stay in that position. He was able to keep France together while making moves to terminate the war, much to the displeasure of the Pieds Noirs, ethnic Europeans born in Algeria, and the military. He awarded Algeria independence and moved gradually towards other French possessions. De Gaulle launched his politics of grandeur during the Cold War, arguing that France, as a strong state, should not rely on other countries, such as the United States, for national security and prosperity. To that purpose, he followed a national independence policy, which led him to withdraw from NATO's integrated military command and establish an independent nuclear strike force, with France becoming the world's fourth nuclear power. He rebuilt friendly Franco-German relations with Konrad Adenauer to establish a European counterweight to the Anglo-American and Soviet spheres of influence by signing the Élysée Treaty on January 22, 1963. De Gaulle opposed the creation of a supranational Europe, preferring Europe as a continent of independent nations. De Gaulle openly criticized the United States' engagement in Vietnam, as well as the exorbitant privilege of the dollar. In his later years, his support for the motto "Vive le Québec libre" and his two vetoes of Britain's accession into the European Economic Community sparked heated debate in both North America and Europe. Although returned to the presidency in 1965, he faced significant student and worker protests in May 1968. But with the army's help, he won a hasty election with a larger majority in the National Assembly. De Gaulle resigned in 1969 after losing a referendum in which he urged further decentralization. He died a year later, at the age of 79, with his presidential memoirs unfinished. Many French political groups and politicians claim a Gaullist heritage, and many streets and monuments in France and around the world have been dedicated to his memory since his death. Military report about rape cases. During and after the liberation of France in the latter stages of World War II, American soldiers raped French women. According to experts, U.S. forces perpetrated around 4,500 rapes in France between June 1944 and the conclusion of the war in May 1945. In 1944, the Western Allies invaded Normandy in June and launched a second invasion in the south in August, bringing nearly 2 million frontline and support troops to France. The liberation of Paris occurred on August 25th, and most German troops had been forced back to the Siegfried Line by the end of 1944. After the war, repatriation and demobilization of troops took time. Even in 1946, months after VE Day, almost 1.5 million troops remained in Europe. Life magazine described France as a tremendous brothel inhabited by 40 million hedonists who spent all their time eating, drinking, making love, and in general, having a hell of a good time among American troops. According to an American historian, the U.S. military condoned rape against French women less than German women. She contended that the number of rapes was well documented and lower than that of several other militaries during that time. She wrote that 904 American soldiers were tried for rape in Europe, and even if the numbers were much higher, they do not compare with the terrible legacy of World War II-era rapes committed, for example, by Japanese in Nanking, Germans in German-occupied areas, French Moroccans in Italy, and Soviet soldiers across Eastern Europe and Germany. Robert Lilly, a professor of sociology and criminology at Northern Kentucky University, estimated that 14,000 rapes were committed by U.S. soldiers in France, Germany, and the United Kingdom between 1942 and 1945. More specifically, Lilly estimated that U.S. servicemen perpetrated approximately 3,500 rapes in France between June 1944 and the conclusion of the war. Medical reports. In German Cold War anti-communist discourses, the image of the Red Army as a horde of rapists was used as an exclusion tool in the development of a national identity based on Western values. This study examines the ideological nature of raped women stereotypes and masculinity constructions in two emblematic texts regarding German flight and expulsion from Eastern and Central Europe, as well as an anti-communist American propaganda fiction. The mass rape of German women during World War II was attributed to Asian barbarism and communism. The instrumentalization of wartime rapes, which demonized the Soviet Union, bolstered the Federal Republic's two foreign policy pillars, European integration and transatlantic solidarity. Thousands of women pregnant. They dubbed it the epuration sauvage, or wild purge, because it was impromptu and unauthorized, but it was also savage. In the weeks and months following the D-Day landings on June 6, 1944, Allied troops and the resistance stormed through France, liberating cities and villages and sparking a wave of social exhilaration, relief, and hope, and then the consequences started. The victims were women, the community's most vulnerable members. They were publicly humiliated by vigilantes after being accused of horizontal collaboration, like sleeping with the enemy. Their heads were shaved, they were stripped naked, coated with tar, and paraded around cities where they were insulted, stoned, kicked, assaulted, spat upon, and occasionally killed. Some ladies had slept with Nazi troopers, and others were prostitutes. However, several were raped. Some were the victims of personal vendettas, framed and wrongly accused. Some had very brief interactions with their occupiers. The vast majority of those imprisoned were single, unmarried, widowed, or married women whose husbands were prisoners of war. For single mothers, sleeping with a German was frequently the only way to provide food for their hungry children. It didn't only happen in France. Other countries throughout occupied Europe, such as Belgium, Italy, the Netherlands, and Norway, witnessed comparable events, but on a smaller scale. Following the war, several of these comfort women became pregnant and died because of their experiences. Some committed suicide, and many of those who survived concealed their trauma for the rest of their lives. Our thumbnail is quite gruesome, and the image speaks 1,000 words. It's incredible how human beings quickly turned into savages during wartime. I have seen many documentaries about World War II, but it's the first time I have heard about so many rapes. What is your opinion on the subject? Why don't you let us know in the comments below? Well, that's it for now. I hope you enjoyed this video. Please give us a like and let us know in the comments what you think. Check out our other videos and subscribe to be part of the fun. Click on the notification icon so you can see our new videos as soon as they're uploaded.